Chapter 1. The Desecrated Chapel. The wind howled through the dense Bretonnian forest as I rode Beaufort deeper into the wilderness. The towering oaks, their branches gnarled like the fingers of ancient crones, cast long shadows in the fading twilight. The path ahead was barely discernible, swallowed by the thick underbrush and the creeping mist that seemed to rise from the earth itself. My hand instinctively tightened on the reins, my other resting lightly on the hilt of my longsword, Calmont. A knight on the Grail quest could ill afford to ignore such omens. For hours I had followed whispers of a ruined chapel, one once sacred to the Lady of the Lake. Its very existence had drawn me here, a beacon of duty and faith. Yet now, as I drew closer, I felt a prickling unease at the nape of my neck, as though unseen eyes lingered on my every step. Beaufort, my steadfast destrier, whinnied softly, his powerful frame trembling beneath me. "There, boy," I murmured, stroking his neck to calm him. "We press on. The lady guides us." He managed a smile, but it replaced immediately. It was just beyond the ridge that I saw it, a stone chapel, its spire broken and leaning precariously, silhouetted against the blood-red horizon. The roof sagged, and ivy crept over its once pristine walls, swallowing the symbols of devotion that adorned them. The sight stirred something deep within me, a pang of sorrow for what was lost, mingled with dread for what awaited within. Dismounting, I approached cautiously, sword unsheathed and shield ready. Each step seemed to echo unnaturally, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence of the forest. The air here was heavier, as though laced with unseen malice. At the door, splintered and hanging askew, I paused to offer a prayer. "Lady of the Lake, grant me your strength," I whispered, my voice steady despite the thundering of my heart. "Let your light guide me through this darkness." Inside, the stench of decay assaulted my senses. The pews were overturned, their wood splintered as though rent by monstrous claws. Tattered banners, once bearing the lady's sigil, hung limply, stained and defiled. The altar, the heart of this sacred space, stood desecrated at the far end of the nave. My breath caught as I beheld the profane object upon it. The chalice was not the grail I had hoped to find, but a vile mockery of it. Its surface was black as night, adorned with twisted symbols that seemed to shift and writhe when I looked too long. An unnatural glow emanated from within, casting flickering shadows across the ruined chapel. My hand trembled as I took a cautious step closer, the whispers beginning to creep into my mind. Chapter 16. Take it, Julien. Power beyond imagining. Glory eternal. I froze. The voice was smooth, insidious, and yet strangely familiar. It spoke not to my ears, but to my soul, weaving promises of greatness and vindication. I gritted my teeth, clutching the hilt of Calmont tighter, the blade a reassuring weight in my hand. "No," I growled, my voice echoing in the desolate chamber. "I serve the lady, not the darkness." The whispers receded, but their absence was no comfort. I could feel the chalice's malevolence, a festering wound in this holy place. It radiated corruption, and I knew its presence alone was enough to poison the land and its people. This was no ordinary darkness. It was chaos, a blight that could not be allowed to endure. I knelt before the altar, my sword and shield set before me. Closing my eyes, I called upon the lady's guidance, though the weight of doubt pressed heavily upon me. The chalice's whispers lingered, clawing at the edges of my resolve. "Lady," I prayed, my voice faltering, "what would you have me do? How do I cleanse this place?" A variety of things appeared to Lady. For a moment there was no answer, only the oppressive silence of the ruined chapel. I sheathed my sword and stepped back into the waning light. the whispers following me as I mounted Beaufort. The ruined chapel stood silent once more, a dark sentinel against the gathering night. My quest had taken a turn I had not anticipated, and the weight of what lay ahead pressed upon me. The Black Chalice would not rest. Neither would I. Chapter 2. Whispers of Chaos. The journey back to the chapel seemed to stretch endlessly. Every rustle of leaves, every whisper of wind felt laden with unseen eyes and shadowed threats. The Black Chalice weighed heavy in the sack tied to Beaufort's saddle, its presence an unwelcome anchor that dragged on my spirit. Though I could not see it, I felt its malevolence, a pulsing, living thing that seemed to creep into my thoughts with every passing moment. Inside lay the family's life's work as both priests and warriors. It was the only hope I had for protection. By the time I reached the chapel once more, the sun was low on the horizon, casting the land in hues of gold and crimson. Its light was weak, and the ominous structure before me seemed to swallow it whole. Dismounting, I tied Beaufort to a nearby tree, whispering reassurances to calm his nerves. The faithful steed pawed the ground uneasily, his ears twitching in agitation. "I will not be long," I murmured, though even I doubted the truth of my words. Sword drawn, I stepped into the chapel. The air inside felt thicker than before, oppressive and cloying, as though the very stones of the structure had absorbed the chalice's foulness. I approached the altar cautiously, every fiber of my being screaming for me to turn back. Yet I could not. To falter now would be to fail the lady and abandon my vows. There it sat, exposed and defiant on the altar's desecrated surface. The Black Chalice. Its dark glow seemed almost inviting, its curved edges gleaming with an unnatural allure. I hesitated, then set my sword down within arm's reach. Slowly, reluctantly, I extended a hand toward the chalice. As my fingers brushed its cold surface, the whispers began anew. "Julien." The voice was soft, almost soothing. It spoke with the familiarity of an old friend. Yet there was an undercurrent of something sinister, a serpentine hiss that betrayed its true nature. "You are strong, Julien, stronger than you realize. Why suffer in obscurity when you could be remembered as a legend? With me, you could surpass even your father. Exercise these abilities until you improve your mind." My certainty of my abilities and capabilities during the years I spent in the Institute. I snatched my hand back, heart pounding. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. The chalice's voice persisted, unfazed by my resistance. "You seek the Grail, but what has it done for you? Years of struggle, pain, and doubt, and for what? A fleeting glimpse of glory? I offer certainty, power. You need only take it." I staggered back, clutching at the emblem of the lady hanging from my neck. My breaths came in ragged gasps, the weight of the chalice's promises pressing against my will. The words cut deeply, for they mirrored the doubts I had long buried. I had seen comrades fall, heard the whispers of mockery from those who doubted my worth. Could the chalice truly offer a path to vindication? "No," I said aloud, though my voice lacked conviction. "I am a knight of Bretonnia. I serve the Lady of the Lake. Your words mean nothing." The chalice pulsed in response, its dark glow intensifying. The whispers became a cacophony, 1,000 voices layered atop one another. "You serve a dream. I offer reality." My knees buckled under the strain and I fell to the stone floor. Desperation clawed at me as I forced myself to remember the lady's teachings, the tenets of honor and faith. Gritting my teeth, I grasped the pendant at my throat and prayed. "Help me protect her. Lady, grant me strength," I whispered. "Guide me through this darkness." When the rumor reached later that The warmth of her presence was faint, barely a flicker, but it was enough. The whispers receded, though the chalice's oppressive aura lingered. I staggered to my feet, trembling but resolute. The lady's light had not abandoned me, and I would not abandon her cause. I turned my gaze to the chalice. Its surface no longer shimmered, and its glow dimmed. Yet its presence remained undeniable, a festering wound in this sacred place. The whispers had awakened something within me, a shadow of doubt and ambition that I now recognized as my own weakness. This was not merely an object to be destroyed. It was a reflection of the darkness I must overcome. Drawing Calmont from its scabbard, I held the blade aloft. Its steel gleamed in the dim light, a symbol of my purpose and resolve. "I swear to you, lady," I said, my voice steadier now, "this place will be restored. The chalice will not claim me nor anyone else." With trembling hands, I wrapped the chalice in thick cloth, its glow obscured but not extinguished. I would carry this burden for as long as it took to find a way to purify it. The path ahead was unclear, but my course was set. As I left the chapel, the last rays of sunlight kissed the horizon, bathing the land in a fleeting warmth. The night would be long, but I would endure. Chapter 3. A Village in Fear. The road to the village was quiet, save for the creak of Beaufort's saddle and the occasional call of a raven in the distance. The air felt heavy, laden with the weight of unspoken dread. Each step of my destrier seemed to echo unnaturally, as though the earth itself recoiled from my passage. The black chalice, wrapped and secured within my pack, pulsed faintly, a reminder of the corruption I carried. As I crested the hill, the village came into view, a cluster of thatched roofs nestled against the edge of the forest. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, but there was little sign of life. No children played in the streets, no merchants called out their wares. Even the livestock moved listlessly in their pens, their bleating subdued, as if they too sensed the encroaching darkness. I rode into the village square, dismounting with a practiced ease. My arrival drew a few wary glances from behind curtained windows, but no one emerged to greet me. Beaufort pawed the ground uneasily, his breath misting in the cool air. Beneath the surface, his face remained bland as ever. "Peace, boy," I said, patting his flank. "They're frightened, not hostile." Removing my helm, I raised my voice, letting it carry over the silent square. "I am Sir Julien de Calmont, a questing knight in the service of the Lady of the Lake. I seek those who would aid me in restoring the sanctity of a nearby chapel. Your help is needed." For a moment, only the wind answered. Then, cautiously, a man stepped forward. He was older, his face weathered and lined from years of labor, his posture stooped. A tattered cap sat atop his gray head, and his eyes darted nervously to the shadows around him. "Sir Knight," he said, his voice trembling, "you've come at a dark time. We have little to offer, but if you truly mean to help—" He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder as if fearing unseen ears. "Speak freely," I urged, resting a hand on the hilt of my sword. "Whatever evil plagues you, I will face it." The man's eyes met mine, and I saw the faint flicker of hope rekindled. He gestured for me to follow, leading me to the village's modest tavern. Inside, a few villagers gathered, their faces pale and their conversations hushed. The air was thick with unease, and the scent of damp wood and stale ale hung heavy. "This is Sir Julien," the man announced, his voice louder now. "A questing knight. He's here to help." The villagers regarded me with a mix of suspicion and desperation. A woman stepped forward, clutching a shawl around her shoulders. Her hands trembled as she spoke. "It started with the chapel," she said. When the pilgrims stopped coming, we thought little of it, but then—" Her voice faltered, and she exchanged a glance with the others. "The beasts came. And the changes." "Changes?" I prompted, though my stomach tightened at the implications. Acting on control and struggling with her phobia. "Our people. They've gone missing. And when they return—" She trailed off, shivering. "They're not the same," another man finished grimly. "Their eyes are wrong, and their voices. They're not human anymore. We don't know what to do." The room fell silent. I felt their fear pressing against me, a tangible force that threatened to smother hope entirely. These were not warriors or priests, just simple folk trying to survive in a world increasingly hostile to their existence. Cautiously, I placed the large jar of shadow in front of me. "You are right to be afraid," I said, my voice steady but compassionate. "What you describe is the work of chaos. Its corruption has spread from the desecrated chapel and taken root here. But hear me well. I will not abandon you to this darkness." A murmur rippled through the room, doubt and hope warring in their expressions. I removed my gauntlet and placed a hand over my heart. "I'm sorry if there was anything else I can do. I swear on my honor as a knight and in the name of the Lady of the Lake, I will face this evil, no matter the cost." For a moment there was silence, then one by one the villagers nodded, their hope fragile but growing. The older man who had first spoken stepped forward again. "To Julien," he said, his voice firmer now. "If you mean to protect us, you'll need to know what we face. Come, there is something you must see." I followed him out of the tavern, the villagers watching us go with solemn faces. He led me to a small barn at the edge of the village. The scent of hay mingled with something fouler, a sickly, acrid stench that made my stomach churn. Inside, in the corner, lay a man bound in chains. His skin was pallid, his eyes sunken, but it was his face that struck me cold. His features were distorted, as though some alien force had begun reshaping him. His eyes flickered open as we approached, and he snarled, revealing jagged, animalistic teeth. "We found him in the woods," the man said quietly. "He was one of ours. Now he's this." The creature thrashed against its bindings, its voice a guttural growl. I stepped closer, meeting its gaze with steel in my eyes. "Death," I said, my voice low and resolute. The creature's growl deepened, but I turned away, already forming a plan. This village had suffered enough. Whatever darkness had taken hold here, I would root it out and restore their peace. The lady willing, I would not fail them. Chapter 4. The Hermit's Warning. The forest seemed darker now, its ancient canopy casting shadows that felt alive. I guided Beaufort through a winding path, my thoughts heavy with the villagers' plight. The memory of the corrupted man in chains gnawed at my resolve, his words, "The Chalice, it calls," echoing in my mind. I tightened my grip on the reins, determined not to let doubt take root. The trail grew narrower, the trees closing in as if conspiring to bar my passage. Then, through the tangled underbrush, I saw a flicker of movement, a faint light. Beaufort snorted uneasily, his ears flicking forward. "Easy, boy," I said, patting his neck. "It's only a light." I dismounted and approached cautiously, Calmont unsheathed and ready. As I drew closer, the source of the light became clear. A small cabin nestled between the trees, its windows glowing with the warm orange of firelight. Smoke rose from the chimney, a rare sign of life in these forsaken woods. The cabin looked like it was in good shape. Steeling myself, I knocked on the weathered wooden door. It creaked open moments later, revealing an old man cloaked in tattered robes. His face was deeply lined, his gray beard unkempt, but his eyes, sharp and piercing, were those of a warrior who had seen much and endured more. "A knight," he said, his voice rough but steady. "You shouldn't be here." "Nor should you," I replied, lowering my sword slightly. "Yet here we are." "Ah." He regarded me for a moment before stepping aside. "Come in, then, if you seek wisdom and not folly." The cabin was simple but tidy, its shelves lined with books and strange trinkets. A kettle bubbled over the fire, filling the air with the scent of herbs. The hermit gestured for me to sit at a worn table. As I did, he eyed me with the scrutiny of one who had spent years weighing the worth of men. "I am Sir Julien de Calmont," I began, setting my sword on the table, "a questing knight of Bretonnia. I seek to purify a desecrated chapel and rid the land of the chaos that has taken root there." The hermit snorted, a sound of bitter amusement. "A questing knight, eh? Still chasing the dream of the Grail. Do you know how many have come before you with such lofty ambitions?" He bristled at his tone but kept my voice measured. "Whatever their fate, I will not falter." He leaned forward, his gaze narrowing. "Then you're a fool. I was like you once, a knight, proud and devout. I fought for the lady, for honor, for the people. And then I encountered the Chalice, the day of visions, if you remember." He stopped. "The day of Chalice." My breath caught. "You seen it?" "Seen it," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. I held it. I felt its whispers crawl into my mind, offering power, glory, absolution for my failures. At first I resisted, as you surely think you can, but the Chalice is insidious. It does not break you with force, it corrodes you, piece by piece. His words chilled me, but I refused to look away. "How did you escape?" "I didn't," he said, his tone heavy with regret. "By the time I realized what it was doing, it had already twisted my thoughts. I fled, but I left behind a trail of destruction. The Chalice does not merely corrupt the body, it twists the soul. It feeds on your doubts, your desires, and makes them its own." I clenched my fists, my knuckles whitening. "And yet you live, while others suffer?" His eyes flashed with anger. "Do you think I do not carry that weight? I chose exile to contain my shame, to guard others from my folly. But now you have brought the Chalice here, and its darkness will spread." I stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I did not choose this burden, but I will not abandon it. If you have wisdom to share, then speak it. If not, I will find another way." The hermit's anger faded, replaced by a weary resignation. "You are determined, I'll give you that. But know this, the Chalice will test you. It will offer you what you desire most. If you are not prepared to face yourself, you will fail." His words struck a chord deep within me. My father's voice echoed in my memory, his praise always just out of reach. The dream of proving myself worthy of the Grail, of his legacy, burned within me. Could I resist, if the Chalice used that against me? "What must I do?" I asked quietly. "Steel your mind," the hermit said. "Your sword and shield will not save you from the Chalice's whispers. Only your faith and your resolve will see you through. But be warned, the closer you come to defeating it, the louder its voice will grow." 5. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small vial filled with a shimmering liquid. "Take this. It is water from a blessed spring, a faint echo of the Grail's purity. It may help you resist, if only for a time." I accepted the vial with a nod of gratitude, tucking it into my belt. "Thank you, old knight. Whatever your past, you have aided me today." The hermit said nothing, only watching as I gathered my things and stepped toward the door. As I crossed the threshold, his voice stopped me. "Sir Julien," he said, his tone grave, "beware your own heart. It is there that the chalice will strike." I mounted Beaufort and rode into the night, the hermit's warning echoing in my mind. The path ahead was clearer now, but also more treacherous. My faith would be tested, my resolve pushed to its limits. And yet, I swore to myself and to the lady I would not fall. Chapter 5. The First Encounter. The village was eerily still when I returned, the silence oppressive. Beaufort's hooves echoed against the cobblestone, a sound that should have brought comfort, but instead amplified the unease in the air. The villagers I had left behind, who once watched me with wary hope, were nowhere to be seen. Curtains were drawn tight and doors barred. The square lay empty, save for a few scattered tools left abandoned in haste. Gregory's cries of feigned devotion. I dismounted, patting Beaufort's neck to steady him. His ears twitched nervously, and his nostrils flared as though he sensed what I could not yet see. I reached for my sword, the familiar weight of Calmont a reassuring presence at my side. "Show yourselves," I called out, my voice echoing through the stillness. "If you seek to harm these people, you will face me instead." For a moment, nothing stirred. Then, from the edge of the forest, shadows moved. Slowly, deliberately, a band of figures emerged, their forms twisted and grotesque. They were once men, that much was clear, but chaos had reshaped them into something far darker. Horns curled from their skulls. Their skin was marred with unholy light. Their leader, a hulking brute whose armor was pieced together from scavenged metal and bone, stepped forward. He carried a massive axe, its blade slick with what I could only assume was blood. His voice was a guttural snarl, yet there was an unmistakable note of reverence. "The Black Chalice," he growled, his eyes locking onto me. "It calls. You carry it. We serve it." My stomach twisted at his words, the implication hammering home the weight of the burden I bore. Yet I refused to let fear take hold. I raised my sword, its edge gleaming in the fading light. "I serve the Lady of the Lake," I declared, my voice steady, "and I will not let your corruption spread to these lands." The leader laughed, a sound that was more growl than mirth. "The chalice whispers to you, knight. It shows you your path. Why deny its gift?" "I need no gifts from chaos," I spat. "Come forward, if you dare, and see the strength of one who fights for the lady." She stopped. With a guttural roar, the marauders charged. Their speed was unnerving, their twisted forms moving with a predatory grace that belied their size. I braced myself, Calmont steady in my grip, and met their onslaught head-on. The speed was incredible, and the cost of progress collaborative. The first to reach me swung a jagged blade with feral strength. I sidestepped, my sword flashing in an arc that cut deep into his side. He collapsed with a howl, ichor spilling onto the ground. Another came at me, claws extended, but I raised my shield in time to deflect the blow. The force rattled my arm, but I countered with a swift thrust, driving Calmont through his chest. Around me the fight became a blur of steel and blood. The marauders were relentless, their attacks wild but effective. Yet for every blow they landed, my training and faith held firm. Calmont's blade sang with each strike, cutting down one foe after another. The villagers' lives depended on my strength, and I would not falter. Finally, only the leader remained. He circled me like a wolf, his glowing eyes filled with cruel amusement. His axe swung in wide arcs, each strike powerful enough to cleave through my shield had it landed. I parried and dodged, searching for an opening. "You fight well, knight," he snarled, "but the Chalice will claim you. It claims all." I did not answer, focusing instead on his movements. When he raised his axe for a final blow, I saw my chance. Darting forward, I drove Calmont into the exposed joint of his armor, the blade piercing through to his heart. His roar of pain was deafening, but it quickly faded as he collapsed to the ground. Breathing heavily, I wiped the blood from my sword and turned to face the village square. The doors creaked open, and the villagers emerged cautiously, their faces a mixture of relief and fear. The old man I had spoken to earlier approached, his eyes wide. "Julien," he said, his voice trembling, "you've saved us." I sheathed my sword, nodding. "For now, but these were no ordinary bandits. Their presence here means the corruption is spreading faster than I feared." "What'll we do?" the man asked. I hesitated, the weight of the chalice in my pack pressing against my thoughts. "I must find its source," I said finally, "and destroy it. Only then will your village truly be safe." As the villagers tended to their wounded and began to rebuild, I mounted Beaufort once more. The Black Chalice had drawn these marauders here, and their reverence for it hinted at a darker power pulling the strings. I rode out of the village, determined to find this dark master and end its influence before the corruption consumed everything. Chapter 6. The Lady's Vision. Night had fallen, and the forest was quiet save for the faint rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. The day's battle had left my body weary, but it was my soul that bore the greatest burden. The marauders' reverence for the Black Chalice still echoed in my mind, their grotesque forms a stark reminder of what chaos could do to the unprepared. I had sought solitude at the edge of a small glade, far from the village. The moon hung high, its pale light filtering through the canopy above, casting a silver glow over the clearing. Kneeling on the soft grass, I set my sword and shield before me, their edges glinting faintly in the moonlight. With trembling hands, I drew the pendant of the lake from beneath my surcoat and held it tightly. For once, I had no thief and no robbers. "Very well, may I put a pendant on the verge of the lake," he said, climbing on the donkey. "Lady of the lake," I murmured, bowing my head, "hear my prayer. I am lost, and the path before me is clouded with doubt. Grant me your guidance, that I may carry out your will and protect the innocent." For a time there was only silence, the stillness broken by the faint crackle of the campfire I had left behind. I closed my eyes, focusing on the steady rhythm of my breath, willing the unease to leave me. Then the air changed. A warmth, soft and radiant, washed over me, banishing the chill of the night. I opened my eyes to find the glade transformed. The trees shimmered with an ethereal light, their leaves glowing like jewels. The moon's glow had intensified, bathing the clearing in a divine brilliance. And there, standing upon the surface of a still pond that had not been there before, was the Lady of the Lake. She was more beautiful than words could describe. Her form wreathed in a light so pure it seemed to drive away every shadow of doubt within me. Her flowing gown sparkled like starlight, and her serene expression held a mixture of sorrow and resolve. "Cher Julien de Calmont," she said, her voice like a gentle melody. "You have called, and I have come. Rhoda." I fell to my knees, my head bowed in reverence. "My lady," I breathed, my voice trembling, "I am unworthy of your presence, yet I am grateful beyond measure." She stepped forward, her feet gliding over the water as though it were solid ground. "Rise, my knight," she said softly. "You have faced the darkness with courage, but your heart carries doubt. Deared. I looked up, meeting her luminous gaze. My lady, the black chalice, it is beyond anything I have faced. Its whispers claw at my mind, and its corruption spreads like a plague. I fear I will falter. The lady extended a hand, and a vision bloomed before me. I saw the chalice, dark and pulsating, sitting atop the desecrated altar. Around it swirled a storm of shadows, their forms grotesque and ever-changing. At the center of the storm stood a towering figure clad in blackened armor, its eyes burning with malevolent light. The black chalice is a relic of chaos, she said, her tone grave. Its power corrupts not only the body but the soul, preying on weakness and desire. Those who fall to its influence become slaves to its master. Who is its master? I asked, though I feared the answer. A champion of chaos, she replied, her voice heavy with sorrow. One who once sought the Grail but fell to darkness. To banish the chalice, you must confront this champion. Yet the path will not be easy. The vision shifted, and I saw myself standing before the ruined chapel, the chalice in my hands. Its whispers were louder, more insistent, and my grip faltered as shadows reached for me. So freighted. You carry the chalice now, the lady continued. Its power grows with each passing moment. The longer you bear it, the greater its hold over you will become. But you must not yield. The chalice dipped in the water again, gathering strength. The lady looked. I clenched my fists, her words igniting a fire within me. What must I do, my lady? How can I cleanse this corruption? The vision shifted once more, revealing a golden grail glowing with divine light. It rested in a serene glade much like the one I knelt in now, its presence a beacon of hope. The warmth of its glow seemed to reach out to me, filling me with renewed strength. The lost grail, the lady said, her voice imbued with both sorrow and resolve. It is the only force that can counter the chalice's corruption. You must find it and use its power to banish the chalice forever. The demon sighed itself. But where is it? I asked desperately. How do I find it? The Grail will reveal itself to one who is pure of heart and steadfast in faith, she said. Trust in the path, Sir Julien, and remember, the chalice will tempt you at every turn. It will show you your deepest desires and exploit your greatest fears. Only by staying true to your purpose will you succeed. I bowed my head once more, my resolve hardening. I will not fail, my lady. I swear it. The lady stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on my shoulder. Her touch was warm, and the weight of her blessing filled me with a profound sense of peace. Rise, said Julien, she said. Your journey will be fraught with peril, but you do not walk it alone. My light will guide you, even in the darkest of times. As her words faded, so did the vision. The glade returned to its natural state, the divine light replaced by the soft glow of moonlight. I rose to my feet, the pendant of the lady clutched tightly in my hand. The warmth of her presence lingered, a reminder of her blessing. The path was clear now. I would find the lost grail and use its power to destroy the black chalice. No matter the cost, no matter the trials ahead, I would fulfill the lady's will. My resolve was unshakable, my faith renewed. For the lady, for Bretonnia, and for all who could not fight this darkness themselves, I would prevail. Chapter 7. The Twisting Shadows. The journey back to the chapel felt heavier with each passing step, as though the very air conspired to slow my progress. The lady's vision had strengthened my resolve, yet it also cast a stark light on the doubts lurking in my heart. What if I was not strong enough? What if I fell, as others before me had? The black chalice weighed heavily in my pack, its whispers muted but ever present, like a dark rhythm thrumming just beneath the surface of my thoughts. The chapel came into view as the sun dipped below the horizon, its silhouette stark and jagged against the deepening dusk. The broken spire jutted into the sky like an accusing finger, and the ruin seemed to exhale a palpable malevolence. Dismounting Beaufort, I patted his flank to calm him. He whinnied softly, his breath visible in the cold evening air. "Taken a taxi from the hospital where I was eaten alive?" he asked. "Stay here, old friend," I said, tying his reins to a nearby tree. "This is a battle I must face alone." Sword and shield in hand, I approached the chapel's entrance. The temperature seemed to plummet as I stepped inside, the air thick with an unnatural chill. The desecrated altar loomed at the far end of the nave, shrouded in darkness, though no shadows fell naturally here. As I drew closer, a low, sinister murmur filled the air. "Julien." I froze, my blood turning cold. The voice was not my own, yet it carried a familiarity that was unsettling. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once, reverberating through the crumbling walls like a mournful dirge. Then, from the corners of the chapel, the shadows began to move. They coalesced into forms, twisted, humanoid shapes with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce my soul. Each figure was distinct, yet they all bore a haunting resemblance to people I had known. One stepped forward, its face a distorted reflection of my father's, his eyes filled with disappointment. "You will never be him," the apparition said, its voice dripping with scorn. "No matter how hard you try, you will never match his legacy." I tightened my grip on Calmont, my heart pounding. "You are not my father," I said, though the words came out strained. The gruff Englishman stared at me for a blank moment before murmuring something in French. He pointed to the words on the clear plate. Another figure emerged, its form shifting and flickering. It took on the shape of a fallen comrade, his armor shattered, his body broken. "You let me die," it hissed. "Your quest for glory cost me my life." "Enough!" I roared, raising my shield as if to ward off their accusations. "You are nothing but lies, shadows conjured by chaos." But they did not retreat. Instead, they surrounded me, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. "You are weak. You will fail. The lady has abandoned you." Their words sliced deeper than any blade, drawing forth memories and fears I had tried to bury. My legs trembled, and I fell to one knee, the weight of their accusations pressing down on me like a suffocating fog. Then, through the cacophony, a faint warmth bloomed within me. The pendant of the lady, hanging around my neck, seemed to pulse with light. I grasped it tightly, my fingers trembling, and closed my eyes. "Lady of the Lake," I whispered, my voice barely audible, "grant me your strength." The warmth grew, spreading through my body like a soothing balm. My breathing steadied, and the whispers began to falter. Slowly I rose to my feet, Calmont steady in my grip. "You are not real," I said, my voice firm. "You are nothing but the shadows of my doubts, and I will not be ruled by them." The apparitions hesitated, their forms flickering as though they were struggling to maintain their hold on reality. Seizing the moment, I stepped forward, my sword gleaming in the dim light. "I am Sir Julien de Calmont," I declared, my voice echoing through the ruined chapel. "I am a knight of Bretonnia, and my faith is my shield. Begone!" My reply seemed to impress him, for he let out a low groan, then looked me over, his eyes filled with pain. With a cry, I swung my blade. Calmont's edge cut through the shadows as if they were smoke, each strike dispersing the figures in bursts of darkness. One by one they dissolved, their whispers fading into nothingness. As the last shadow fell, the chapel grew silent. The oppressive weight lifted, and for the first time I felt as though I could breathe freely. The altar still bore the chalice, its presence a stark reminder of the task ahead, but the victory over my doubts had strengthened my resolve. I knelt before the desecrated altar, setting my sword and shield before me once more. "Lady of the Lake," I prayed, "thank you for your light in the darkness. I swear to you I will not falter. This chapel will be cleansed, and the chalice destroyed." The silence that followed was peaceful, the faint glow of the pendant a reminder of her blessing. Rising to my feet, I turned to leave the chapel, my steps lighter than before. The road ahead was still long and fraught with danger, but I carried with me the greatest weapon of all, faith unyielding. Chapter 8. The Reluctant Ally. The forest stretched endlessly before me, a labyrinth of shadows and muted colors. The battle in the chapel had left me both weary and resolute. My faith had seen me through, but I knew I could not face the growing darkness alone. The Black Chalice's influence was spreading, and its mysteries eluded me. I needed answers I could not find on my own. After a long search for answers to my prayers, I found them. As I pressed deeper into the woods, the sound of snapping branches and labored breathing drew my attention. I slowed Beaufort, my hand instinctively moving to the hilt of Calmont. The noise came closer, erratic and desperate, until finally a figure burst through the underbrush. It was a woman, her appearance striking and wild. Her cloak was tattered, her face streaked with dirt and blood, and her breath came in ragged gasps. In one hand, she clutched a staff adorned with glowing runes. In the other, a small satchel that seemed to pulse faintly, as though it held something alive. She stumbled to a halt when she saw me, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and defiance. "Well, exclaimed a man, his arms wide with a mix of fear and defiance. "Is the car still here?" "A knight," she said, her voice hoarse but sharp. "Of all the misfortunes." "I wondered the same thing," he said. I dismounted, keeping my sword at the ready. "Who are you, and why do you flee?" She took a cautious step back, her grip on the staff tightening. "If you're here to kill me, knight, know that I'll not go down without a fight." "I have no intention of killing you," I replied evenly, though my gaze did not waver from hers. "But you've clearly crossed paths with chaos, and that makes you dangerous." Her laugh was bitter. "Dangerous? You have no idea. I've been hunted for weeks, and now I find myself facing a Bretonnian zealot. Wonderful." There was silence. "Age." I stepped closer, my tone firm. "I will not ask again." "Who are you?" She hesitated, then let out a weary sigh. "My name is Chalice. I was once a mage of Lorraine, but now I am merely a fugitive, fleeing the horrors of chaos." Her words stirred something within me, a memory of the hermit's warning, of chaos preying upon the weak and the desperate. Yet there was no corruption in her gaze, only exhaustion and a hint of desperation. "What is in the satchel?" I asked, gesturing to the pulsing bag. His eyes flicked to it, her expression guarded. "Knowledge. Fragments of texts and artifacts I stole from a chaos coven. They would have twisted this power to destroy more of the land, but in my hands it may yet be turned against them." Maiden fingered the dagger she wore by her side, her face solemn and sad. I frowned, my instincts warring with my reason. To trust a sorceress, especially one tied to such dark forces, was a risk I could ill afford. Yet her words carried a conviction that I could not ignore. "Why were you fleeing?" I pressed. She cast a glance over her shoulder, her face pale. "They're coming for me. Chaos does not forgive betrayal. If you're smart, you'll ride the other way and leave me to my fate. The girl stared fixedly at them. I stepped forward, planting Calmont firmly in the ground. I cannot do that. The corruption of chaos is spread to a chapel near here, and the villagers suffer under its shadow. If you truly oppose it, then help me. Elisa's eyes narrowed. You would trust a sorceress? How noble of you, knight. Or is it desperation? The Marquis said. It is duty, I said firmly. If you have knowledge that can help me cleanse this land, then I have no choice but to accept your aid. But know this, should you turn against me, I will not hesitate to strike you down. End of note. For a moment she said nothing, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded, her grip on the satchel relaxing slightly. Fair enough. If you truly wish to unravel the Chalice's secrets, I may be able to help. But you will not like what you find. Examining the satchel, she said, I sheathed my sword, though my hand remained near the hilt. Speak then. What do you know of the Black Chalice? Elise hesitated, then opened the satchel. From within she pulled a fragment of parchment, its edges charred and its surface covered in ancient symbols. She spread it out on a nearby rock, gesturing for me to look. The chalice is no ordinary artifact, she began. It is a tether to an ancient chaos champion, one who was once a seeker of the Grail, like you. I felt a chill run through me. A knight of Bretonnia? She nodded grimly. Once, long ago. He sought the Grail with a fervor unmatched. But his pride and ambition made him vulnerable. Chaos twisted his desires, promising him power and eternal glory. He drank from the chalice, and in doing so, he bound himself to its will. And now? I asked, my voice low. Elise said, her tone heavy. A servant of chaos, his soul forever tied to the chalice. As long as he lives, its power cannot be destroyed. To banish the chalice, you must confront him and sever the bond. My jaw tightened as the weight of her words sank in. A fallen knight, corrupted by the very forces I now opposed. The task before me seemed insurmountable, yet there was no room for hesitation. I need to be free. She lowered her hands and faced me, expectantly. Where can I find him? I asked. Elisa's gaze met mine, her expression grave. I swallowed hard, my resolve wavering for the briefest moment. To follow the chalice was to invite its corruption, yet there was no other path forward. I waited patiently. Very well, I said finally. We will journey together, but understand this, I will not tolerate treachery. Execute the orders at once. I reached onto the table and picked up the countertop. Elise smirked faintly, though her eyes remained somber. Understood, knight. Let us hope neither of us regrets this alliance. As we prepared to leave the glade, I could not help but feel that my journey had taken a darker turn. The road ahead was fraught with peril, but the lady's light still guided me, and with Elisa's knowledge I had a chance to uncover the chalice's secrets and confront the darkness that awaited. Chapter 9. The Pilgrim's Sword. The path wound steeply upward, the dense forest giving way to rocky outcroppings and narrow trails carved into the hillside. Each step was a struggle against fatigue, my body still bearing the weight of past battles and the burdens of my quest. Elise walked a short distance ahead, her staff glowing faintly to light the way. The sorceress had proven useful thus far, but her presence was a constant reminder of how far my path had strayed from the ideals of a Grail Knight. "Are you certain this is the place?" I called, my voice echoing against the jagged cliffs. Elise stopped, turning to face me with an impatient look. "I've studied these maps longer than you've been alive, Knight. If the reliquary still stands, it's here." Her tone grated on me, but I held my tongue. The lady's teachings urged humility and focus, and I could ill afford petty distractions now. I followed her to a small plateau where the entrance to a forgotten structure emerged from the stone, half hidden by overgrown ivy. The remnants of a weathered arch bore faint carvings of the lady's sigil, the sight of which brought a flicker of hope to my weary heart. "This is it," I said, more to myself than to Elise. "The reliquary." She waved a hand dismissively. "Be cautious. Even sacred places can hide dangers." Pushing the ivy aside, I entered, the air inside cool and still. The chamber was small and dimly lit, its stone walls adorned with faded murals depicting scenes of knights kneeling before the lady. At the far end of the room stood a pedestal, and upon it rested a sword. The blade was magnificent. Its hilt was engraved with symbols of purity and courage, and the crossguard bore the lady's sigil. Though tarnished by time, the sword's brilliance shone through, a faint glow emanating from the steel, as if it still carried the blessings of its original owner. It was a weapon of grace and power, unlike anything I had ever seen. "This," I whispered, stepping closer, "was no ordinary knight's blade." Elise, who had followed me inside, observed silently for a moment before speaking. "It belonged to a Grail knight," she said, her voice unusually subdued. "A champion of the lady, long before chaos defiled these lands. It is said the blade carries her blessing, making it a bane to darkness." My hand trembled as I reached for the sword. The moment my fingers closed around the hilt, a warmth surged through me. It was not the oppressive heat of chaos, but a pure, invigorating energy that seemed to banish every shadow of doubt within me. I lifted the blade, its weight perfect in my grasp, and felt a connection to something far greater than myself. I felt a truth, a life, and felt a connection to something far greater than myself. The murals on the walls seemed to brighten, their faded colors regaining some of their former vibrancy. The air itself grew lighter, and for the first time in days, I felt truly at peace. "It's as if the lady herself is guiding my hand," I murmured, turning the blade to catch the faint light filtering through a crack in the ceiling. "It's..." Elise leaned on her staff, watching me with an expression I could not quite read. "That sword may prove the difference between victory and defeat, knight. But do not forget, no weapon, no matter how divine, can replace resolve." "Wrong." I nodded, her words aligning with the lady's teachings. A sword, even one as sacred as this, was only as strong as the one who wielded it. Yet I could not deny the renewed strength it gave me. As I strapped the sword to my belt, Elise turned her attention to the walls, her fingers tracing the ancient carvings. "These markings speak of purification," she said, her tone thoughtful. "The blade is not just for slaying foes. It may hold the key to cleansing the chapel itself." Her insight struck me like a revelation. The Black Chalice's corruption was too deeply rooted for steel alone to banish, but a weapon imbued with the lady's blessing? That was another matter entirely. "Then it is more than a weapon," I said, my voice steady. "It is a beacon of hope." Elise raised an eyebrow, but she did not argue. "Hope, knight, is something this land desperately needs. But be wary. Chaos will not stand idle while you wield such a tool." Hope dipped her head to one side and sighed. Her words reminded me of the ever-present threat, but I would not let fear take root. With the lady's light guiding me, and this blessed sword in my grasp, I felt ready to face whatever horrors awaited. As we exited the reliquary, the sun broke through the clouds, casting golden rays across the forest below. The moment felt like an omen, a sign that the lady's favor was with us. Mounting Beaufort, I turned to Elise. "Let us return to the chapel," I said, determination filling my voice. The time has come to take the next step." She nodded, her expression unreadable, and we set off together. The road ahead was still perilous, but for the first time I felt the scales tipping in our favor. The pilgrim's sword was more than a relic. It was a promise of redemption, a weapon to turn the tide against chaos, and with it I would fulfill my oath to the lady, no matter the cost. Chapter 10. The Champion's Challenge. The air was thick with malice as I stepped into the corrupted chapel once more, the twisted whispers of the black chalice louder than ever. Its foul aura permeated every corner of the once sacred place, and the very stones of the altar seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. My hand tightened around the hilt of the pilgrim's sword, its divine warmth a welcome counter to the oppressive darkness. Elise lingered at the chapel's threshold, her staff raised defensively. "He's here," she said, her voice tense. "I can feel it." I nodded, my gaze fixed on the desecrated altar. The lady's light had guided me to this moment, and I knew the battle ahead would test every ounce of my strength and resolve. Drawing the pilgrim's sword, I stepped forward, each footfall echoing ominously in the silent chamber. Then he appeared. The Chaos Champion emerged from the shadows like a wraith, his massive frame encased in blackened armor adorned with unholy symbols. His eyes burned with a fiery red light, and the massive, jagged blade in his hands seemed to radiate malice. He moved with an unnatural grace for one so large, each step deliberate and menacing. "So, the would-be savior comes at last," he rumbled, his voice a guttural growl that reverberated through the chapel. "You carry the chalice's curse, yet you resist. Admirable, but futile." "I carry the lady's blessing," I retorted, raising my sword. "And I will see this place purified, even if it costs me my life." The champion laughed, a sound devoid of mirth. "Your faith is a fragile shield, knight. You will break, as all before you have." Without warning he charged, his massive blade cleaving through the air with terrifying speed. I raised my shield just in time, the impact sending a jarring shock through my arm and nearly toppling me. His strength was monstrous, each swing of his weapon capable of splitting stone. I danced back, narrowly avoiding a second strike, and countered with a slash of my own. The pilgrim's sword gleamed as it struck his armor, the divine energy within it cutting through the corrupted steel. The champion roared in pain, but his counterattack was swift and relentless. He swung low, forcing me to leap aside, then followed with an overhead strike that cracked the stone floor where I had been standing. We killed the one who came at us. The warrior killed several others and fought down a third, but the strike at the same time left the warriors still standing. "You fight well," he growled, his fiery gaze locked on me. "But skill will not save you. The chalice has already claimed you. I see it in your eyes." His words clawed at my mind, feeding the doubts I had fought so hard to bury. The weight of the chalice's whispers seemed to double, pressing against my thoughts like a vice. For a moment, my grip on the sword faltered. But then I remembered the lady's vision, the warmth of her blessing, and the light that had banished my fears. I steadied myself, clutching the pilgrim's sword tightly. "I am not yours to claim," I said, my voice firm. "I serve the lady, and her light will prevail." The champion snarled, his attacks growing more ferocious. I parried and dodged, the divine blade in my hands answering each swing with a purity that seemed to cut through his darkness. The battle was brutal and unrelenting, the air filled with the clash of steel and the champion's guttural roars. Finally I saw an opening, As he raised his blade for a devastating strike, I surged forward, driving the pilgrim's sword into the exposed joint of his armor. The blade pierced through, and a brilliant light erupted from the wound. The champion howled, his body convulsing as the divine energy of the sword seared through him. "I can't see anything," he managed, while his eyes tried to make sense of his surroundings. "I think—" "No!" he roared, his voice filled with rage and despair. "This cannot be." I twisted the blade, and with a final defiant cry, the champion collapsed to the ground. His armor crumbled away, and the unholy light in his eyes dimmed, leaving only an empty shell. The oppressive darkness in the chapel began to lift, the whispers of the chalice fading into silence. Breathing heavily, I withdrew the sword and stepped back. The altar, though still desecrated, no longer pulsed with malevolence. The champion's defeat had weakened the chalice's grip on this place, but I knew the battle was far from over. Elise approached cautiously, her staff glowing faintly. "You did it," she said, her voice tinged with awe. "The champion is no more," I nodded, though my heart remained heavy. "The chalice still endures," I said, turning to face the vile artifact, "but its power is waning. We must act quickly to banish it before the corruption takes hold again." She studied me for a moment, her expression unreadable. "You fought well, knight," she said finally. "Better than I expected." "I fought for the lady," I replied simply, "and for those who cannot fight for themselves." As we prepared to leave the chapel, the pilgrim's sword glowed faintly in my hand, a beacon of hope in the lingering shadows. The champion's defeat was a victory, but it was only the beginning. The road ahead was still fraught with danger, and the final confrontation with the chalice's true master loomed ever closer. Yet my resolve was stronger than ever. For the lady, for Bretonnia, and for the countless lives at stake, I would see this quest to its end. Chapter 11. The False Victory. The chapel stood quiet and still as Beaufort and I approached, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. Its once crumbling walls seemed less foreboding now, their jagged edges softened by ivy and moss. The oppressive weight that had once suffocated the air was gone, replaced by a tranquil stillness that felt almost sacred. My heart swelled with hope. Perhaps the lady's light had truly prevailed, banishing the darkness from this hallowed place. Watching the lady, the family reached the top of the steep rock formation leading to the light of the chapel. I dismounted, my boots crunching against the gravel path. The pilgrim's sword hung at my side, its divine warmth still faintly present, though subdued. I stepped through the chapel's doorway, the shattered remnants of its once desecrated altar now replaced by something resembling its original purity. The sigils of the lady, long defiled, glowed faintly, their light a testament to her blessing. Light soft rays of light flooded the chapel. For the first time in days, I allowed myself a moment of relief. I knelt before the altar, setting my sword and shield before me, and offered a prayer of gratitude. "Lady of the Lake," I whispered, bowing my head, "your light has guided me through the darkness, and your blessings have given me the strength to stand against chaos. May this place remain forever in your grace." The silence that followed was serene, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves outside. I closed my eyes, letting the peace of the moment wash over me. The battle had been long and grueling, but it was over. The champion was vanquished, and the chalice's grip on the land was broken. Or so I thought. A faint sound stirred behind me, like the whisper of wind through the trees. My eyes snapped open, and a cold dread seeped into my chest. Slowly, I turned, my hand instinctively moving to the hilt of the pilgrim's sword. The cold sword lay at my feet as I reached for it. There, On the altar it sat, the black chalice. Its surface gleamed with an unnatural luster, its twisted engravings pulsating faintly as though alive. The whispers began anew, louder and more insistent than before. It was later, morning of the following day, when they were expected to arrive. "You cannot destroy me, Julien. I am eternal." "No," I muttered, shaking my head. "This cannot be. The champion is defeated, the land is cleansed." The chalice seemed to laugh, its dark aura growing stronger. The room darkened, the faint light of the lady's sigils dimming as shadows crept across the walls. "You have only delayed the inevitable night. My master still endures, and through me, so shall his power. Identify the man who slew his master and suffer." I stumbled back, my mind racing. How could this be? The champion's death was supposed to sever the chalice's connection to chaos. Had I been wrong, or had the lady's vision revealed only part of the truth? Lise appeared at the doorway, her face pale as she took in the sight before her. "It's stronger," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The champion's death has weakened its bond, but it is still tethered to this place." "Then how do we destroy it?" I demanded, my voice trembling with frustration. "How do we end this?" Her gaze met mine, and I saw the answer in her eyes before she spoke. "It requires a sacrifice, a final act of purification. Only something, or someone, infused with the lady's blessing can sever its ties completely." The words struck like a hammer. My blood turned cold as I realized what she meant. The pilgrim's sword, imbued with the lady's light, had been my salvation against the champion, but it alone was not enough. It required more. Much more. My life. The chalice's whispers grew louder, mocking and taunting. "You would throw away your life for nothing, Julien. The villagers will forget you. Your quest will be in vain." I gritted my teeth, my hand clenching the hilt of the pilgrim's sword. "They will not forget," I said, my voice firm. "The lady will not forget, and this land will endure because of it." It began to die. Elise's eyes widened, understanding dawning in her expression. "Julien, you can't. There must be another way." "There isn't," I said, rising to my feet. "This is the path the lady has chosen for me. It is my duty, my purpose." She stepped forward, her voice desperate. "If you do this, the world will lose one of its few true defenders. Don't throw that away." I placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a faint smile. "The lady's will is clear. This is not the end, Elise. It is merely my final act of service." Turning to the chalice, I drew the pilgrim's sword. Its blade glowed brighter than ever, the divine energy within it resonating with the lady's blessing. The whispers grew frantic, their promises turning to desperate threats. "You cannot do this. You will doom yourself to oblivion." I ignored them, stepping closer to the altar. The air around the chalice burned cold, its dark energy pushing against me like a physical force. Yet the warmth of the pilgrim's sword held it at bay, guiding me forward. "Lady of the Lake," I said, raising the blade, "grant me the strength to banish this darkness. Let my sacrifice cleanse this place and restore your light." With a cry, I drove the blade into the chalice. A blinding light erupted from the altar, flooding the chapel and banishing every shadow. The whispers turned to screams, then faded into nothingness. The chalice shattered, its shards dissolving into dust. The last thing I saw was Elise's face, her expression a mixture of sorrow and awe. Then, the light consumed me, and all was still. When the light faded, the chapel stood purified. The sigils of the lady glowed brighter than ever, and the oppressive aura was gone. Elise stood alone, tears streaming down her face. The pilgrim's sword lay on the altar, its glow dim but steady, a symbol of the sacrifice that had restored the chapel's sanctity. The lady's blessing lingered in the air, a testament to the knight who had given everything for her cause. Beth tilted her head to the workings of the chapel. Chapter 12. The Trial of Faith. The world around me faded as the pilgrim's sword struck the chalice, and for a moment I felt weightless. The warmth of the lady's light that had steadied me moments ago seemed distant now, replaced by an eerie stillness. I stood in a void, neither light nor shadow, where the air itself felt heavy, oppressive. Julien. The voice was smooth and familiar, reverberating through the emptiness. It was not the harsh, guttural growl of the Chaos Champion, nor the malevolent hiss of the Chalice's whispers. It was softer, almost inviting. "Theria, show yourself," I demanded, gripping the pilgrim's sword tightly. My voice echoed into the void, swallowed by the unnatural silence. The darkness began to shift, coalescing into images. Slowly, a scene unfolded before me, a field bathed in golden sunlight, with wild flowers swaying in a gentle breeze. At the center stood a knight clad in radiant armor, his back turned to me. I recognized the emblem on his cloak instantly, a silver falcon on a field of green, the sigil of my house. Another remainder of the Victorian, legendary Christian Archbishop of the Temple, who served as my signature. "Father," I whispered, my breath catching in my throat. He turned, his face stern but proud, just as I remembered. His eyes, a mirror of my own, softened as they met mine. "Julien," he said, his voice strong yet warm, "you have done well." I stepped forward, my heart pounding. "Father, is it truly you?" He nodded, extending a hand. "You've proven yourself worthy, my son. The lady has chosen you. Kneel and take your place among the Grail Knights." Simon did. At his words, the air seemed to hum with approval. Behind him, a figure emerged, a woman clad in shimmering robes, her face veiled but radiant. The Lady of the Lake. She carried a chalice in her hands, its golden surface gleaming with divine light. "Julien de Calmont," she said, her voice like a song. "You have endured much and remain steadfast. Drink and fulfill your destiny." My heart ached with longing. This was everything I had ever desired. My father's approval, the honor of the Grail, the fulfillment of my quest. I took a step forward, then hesitated. Something about the scene felt too perfect, too easy. The weight of the pilgrim's sword in my hand reminded me of the harsh truths I had faced on my journey. "No," I said, stepping back. The figures stilled, their smiles faltering. The lady tilted her head, her voice gentle. "Do you not wish for this, Sir Julien? All you have sought lies before you." Lady Sin smirked. I gritted my teeth, my grip tightening on the sword. "You are not the lady. This is a lie." My father's face darkened, his features twisting into something grotesque. "You would reject your father's approval," he snarled, his voice turning harsh. "You would deny the Grail, the very purpose of your quest." But Faith was too lazy to object. I stepped back further, the void around me darkening, the golden field warped, the flowers withering, the sunlight fading into a sickly green hue. The chalice in the lady's hands began to shift, its surface blackening, twisting into the form of the black chalice. "This is chaos," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. "You seek to twist my desires into chains, but I am no slave to you." The illusions shattered, the radiant figures dissolving into ash. The void around me trembled as the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. They crashed into my mind like the greatest hurricanes of all time. "You are nothing without us, Julien. Your faith is a fragile shield, and the lady will abandon you." I fell to one knee, the weight of the chalice's voice pressing down on me. Doubts clawed at my mind, whispering of failure and futility. But then, from within, I felt a faint warmth, the pendant of the lady around my neck. It pulsed gently, a reminder of her light, her guidance. "Lady of the Lake," I whispered, closing my eyes, "grant me the strength to see through the lies of chaos." The warmth grew, spreading through me like a flame. The whispers faltered, their strength waning in the face of my resolve. Slowly, I rose to my feet, the pilgrim's sword glowing brightly in my hand. "I am Sir Julien de Calmont," I declared, my voice firm and unwavering. "I serve the Lady of the Lake, and my faith is my shield. Your illusions hold no power over me." The void erupted in a blinding light, the darkness consumed by the purity of the sword's glow. The whispers turned to anguished screams before fading into silence. When the light receded, I stood once more in the chapel, the shattered remnants of the black chalice before me. Breathing heavily, I fell to my knees, the pendant warm against my chest. The trial was over, and my faith had endured. The chalice's power was broken, but I knew the fight against chaos was far from finished. Rising to my feet, I gripped the pilgrim's sword tightly. The lady's light had seen me through, and I would carry it with me until the end. Chapter 13. The Purification Rite. The chapel stood eerily silent as Elise and I prepared the purification rite. The once overwhelming aura of the black chalice had waned, but its presence lingered, like a festering wound in the fabric of this sacred space. The shattered remnants of the chalice lay scattered on the altar. But I knew its power was far from destroyed. Chaos had not relinquished its hold so easily. "A stand behind the demons," Chalice said, his eyes locked in the depth. Elise's staff glowed faintly as she arranged the components of the ritual. Candles carved with intricate runes, a vial of water blessed by an ancient grove, and a tattered book of spells recovered from a hidden archive. Her movements were swift and deliberate, yet her face betrayed a hint of unease. "This is dangerous," she said, glancing up at me. "The rite will draw out the chalice's remaining power, but it will fight back. Chaos doesn't let go without a struggle." "I am ready," I replied, gripping the pilgrim's sword tightly. Its divine warmth steadied me, a reminder of the lady's light that had guided me this far. "Tell me what I must do." She pointed to a circle etched into the floor, its lines glowing faintly with arcane energy. "Stand there and hold the sword high. The blade carries the lady's blessing. It will anchor the ritual and protect us from the worst of the backlash. But you must hold fast, no matter what happens." I stepped into the circle, the air growing heavy with anticipation. As Elise began to chant, the room darkened, the faint light of the candles casting long, flickering shadows. The sigils on the altar glowed brighter, their brilliance battling the encroaching darkness. I raised the pilgrim's sword, its blade shining like a beacon. The chalice's remnants began to shift, the shards vibrating as though alive. A low, guttural hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing moment. The ground beneath me trembled, and the whispers of chaos returned, their voices more insistent than ever. Chaos returned gradually with the effects of the transformation, louder and louder, their voices more insistent than ever. "You dare defy us, knight," the voices hissed. "You are nothing against the will of chaos." Wizard. Elise's chanting grew louder, her voice cutting through the cacophony. The circle beneath me flared with light, and the shards of the chalice rose into the air, spinning violently. A sudden explosion of energy erupted from the altar, knocking Elise back, and leaving me alone in the eye of the storm. From the swirling chaos emerged a figure, tall, monstrous, and wreathed in shadows. Its form was vaguely humanoid, but its proportions were grotesque, its limbs too long and its face an amalgamation of shifting features. Its eyes burned with a sickly green light, and its voice was a chorus of rage. "I am the avatar of the Chalice," it boomed, its voice shaking the very walls of the chapel. "You are but a fleeting spark in the eternal flame of chaos. You will be snuffed out." I gripped the pilgrim's sword tightly, its glow unwavering. "You are nothing but a shadow," I said, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my heart. "The lady's light will banish you." The avatar roared, lunging at me with unnatural speed. I raised my shield just in time, the impact nearly driving me to my knees. Its claws scraped against the enchanted steel, sending sparks flying. I countered with a swing of the pilgrim's sword, the blade cutting through the shadows like a blade of sunlight. The creature howled in pain, but it did not retreat. It struck again and again, each blow heavier than the last. My arms ached, my breath came in ragged gasps, but I held firm. The lady's light within the sword pushed back against the avatar's darkness, each strike weakening its form. "Defer implementation," I said. "It will probably be better for the girls in the end." Elise, regaining her footing, joined the fray. Her staff crackled with energy as she unleashed bursts of light that tore through the creature's defenses. Together we pushed it back toward the altar, the circle of runes glowing brighter with every step. "You cannot win," the avatar snarled, its voice fracturing into a dozen tones. "You are weak, mortal. The lady will abandon you." "She has not abandoned me," I said, driving the pilgrim's sword into its chest. The blade flared with divine light, and the avatar shrieked in agony. Its form began to collapse, the shadows unraveling like threads. Quote, Elise's chanting reached a crescendo, and the light of the ritual circle surged, enveloping the avatar and the shards of the chalice. The creature let out one final, bone-chilling scream before it was consumed entirely, its essence banished into the void. The storm of chaos energy dissipated, leaving the chapel silent once more. The air was still heavy, but the oppressive presence was gone. I lowered the pilgrim's sword, its glow dim but steady, and collapsed to one knee, exhaustion washing over me. Chalice approached, her face pale but determined. "It's done," she said, her voice soft. "The chalice's power is broken." I nodded, the weight of the battle settling on my shoulders. The lady's light had seen us through, but the scars of chaos would linger, both on the land and within me. Rising to my feet, I sheathed the pilgrim's sword and turned to the altar. The sigils glowed faintly, their light a testament to the lady's enduring grace. The chapel, though damaged, was cleansed. The battle was over, but the cost of victory would remain with me forever. Chapter 14, The Triumph of the Lady. The moment the avatar of the chalice was struck down, the air around me shifted. The oppressive darkness that had gripped the chapel seemed to falter, its tendrils retracting as though recoiling from an unseen force. The pilgrim's sword, still glowing faintly in my hand, pulsed with renewed vigor. A warmth spread through me, banishing the cold of fear and fatigue. Elise approached cautiously, her staff flickering with the remnants of her magic. "It's not over," she said, her voice steady but edged with urgency. "The chalice is still here. Its essence lingers." Using shrank Val's, she was right. Though the avatar had fallen, the shards of the black chalice remained suspended above the altar, spinning violently as if resisting their destruction. The whispers returned, louder and more frantic than ever, clawing at the edges of my mind. "You cannot destroy me, Julien. I am chaos eternal. You are nothing." The words scraped against my resolve, but I gripped the pilgrim's sword tighter, its divine warmth a steady reminder of the lady's presence. I stepped forward, placing myself between the shattered chalice and Elise. If this was to be the final battle, I would face it with all the strength and faith I had left. "Elise," I said without turning, "prepare the final incantation. I will hold it at bay." Her voice was resolute. "You can't do this alone." "I am not alone," I replied, lifting the pilgrim's sword high. "The lady is with me." The chalice's shards suddenly surged with energy, a vortex of darkness erupting from their center. Shadows spilled forth, writhing and clawing, as though chaos itself was fighting to reclaim its lost power. The vortex tore at the walls of the chapel, rattling its foundation, but I held my ground, raising the sword to meet the storm. The blade flared with divine light, its brilliance piercing the swirling darkness. The shadows recoiled, their shrieks filling the air. Each step I took toward the altar seemed to amplify the sword's glow, its light growing stronger with every ounce of faith I poured into it. "Lady of the Lake," I shouted, my voice ringing out over the chaos, "grant me your strength. Let your light banish this darkness once and for all." Another book was published, the next film of the Lady of the Lake to die for Christ's sake. The sigils etched into the walls and floor of the chapel began to glow, their light joining that of the pilgrim's sword. Elise raised her staff, chanting in a voice that resonated with ancient power. The combined energy of her magic and the lady's blessing formed a barrier of light, pushing back the vortex. The chalice's voice roared in fury, its whispers turning to guttural cries. "You are nothing but a mortal. You cannot defy us." I pressed forward, each step a battle against the force of chaos. The pilgrim's sword grew hotter in my grasp, its light now blinding. With a final cry, I plunged the blade into the shards of the chalice. The explosion of light was instantaneous and overwhelming. The darkness shattered like glass, the shards dissolving into nothingness. The force of the blast knocked me back, and I fell to my knees, shielding my eyes from the brilliance. When the light subsided, I opened my eyes to a sight I could scarcely believe. The chapel, once a desecrated ruin, was restored to its former glory. The walls, once marred with the sigils of chaos, were pristine, their carvings of the lady shining with a soft, ethereal glow. The altar radiated divine light, its surface unblemished and pure. Even the air felt lighter, as though the very fabric of the space had been cleansed. Elise stood beside me, her expression a mixture of awe and relief. "You did it," she said softly. "The chalice is gone." "No," I said, rising to my feet, the pilgrim's sword still glowing faintly in my hand. "We did it. Without your guidance, I would not have made it this far." The woman stared at me in the darkness for instance, and I realized she had been inscribing into the stone her recollections of. She smiled faintly, her gaze turning to the altar. I approached the altar, kneeling before it and placing the pilgrim's sword gently on its surface. "Lady of the Lake," I whispered, my voice trembling with emotion. "Your guidance has carried me through the darkest of trials. May this chapel remain a beacon of your light, a testament to your grace." The pendant around my neck grew warm, a final sign of the lady's blessing. A deep peace settled over me, one I had not felt in years. The weight of the chalice's corruption was gone, replaced by a profound sense of purpose. After a few moments' silence, the door opened. As I rose, I turned to Elise. "The battle here is over, but the war against chaos continues. Will you stand with me in the fights to come?" The faint mutter came back from the shadows. "You will, Chaos." Elise's voice was firm and several paces away. She nodded, her resolve as steady as my own. Wherever this path takes us, I will follow. Together, we will ensure that chaos does not reclaim what we have fought to protect. Thank you. Together we left the chapel, its doors now open to the light of the rising sun. The lady's triumph had not only restored this sacred place, but strengthened my resolve to carry her light into the darkest corners of the world. The journey was far from over, but for the first time I felt truly ready to face whatever lay ahead. Chapter 15. A Night Renewed. The morning sun bathed the land in a golden glow as I stepped out of the chapel, the doors creaking softly behind me. The air felt different, cleaner, lighter, as if the very essence of the world had been cleansed. The oppressive weight that had hung over this place for so long was gone, replaced by a quiet serenity that spoke of the lady's triumph. I paused on the threshold, taking a moment to breathe deeply. The scent of wildflowers carried on the breeze, mingling with the faint tang of dew-drenched earth. Beaufort waited patiently at the edge of the clearing, his head raised and ears twitching, as if sensing the change. For the first time in days, I felt a profound sense of peace. The pilgrim's sword hung at my side, its glow now subdued but steady, a quiet reminder of the battle we had fought and won. I touched the pendant of the lady at my neck, its warmth a constant reassurance. Though I was not yet a Grail Knight, I knew I was closer to the ideals of knighthood than I had ever been. Elisa approached from behind, her staff tapping lightly against the stone floor of the chapel. Her face was drawn, her exhaustion evident, but there was a faint smile on her lips. "The chapel is restored," she said softly. "You did it." "We did it," I corrected, turning to face her. "Without your knowledge and courage, this victory would not have been possible." She inclined her head, though her expression turned somber. "The fight against chaos is never truly over, Julien. This was but one battle." "The fight?" I nodded, the weight of her words settling over me. "And yet it is a victory. One place reclaimed, one darkness banished. The lady's light shines brighter today because of what we've done." I put down my hammer. "Yeah, I felt it too, and there is nothing that can take it from us," Kate said. Together, we made our way back to the village, the trail familiar yet transformed by the purifying energy that now emanated from the chapel. As we entered the square, the villagers emerged cautiously from their homes. Their faces, once etched with fear and despair, now bore expressions of hope. Exercises. We talked to some of the younger priests who were there at the time, and they all told us the same story, thriving after their return. Sir Julien, the old man who had first welcomed me, stepped forward, his eyes glistening with gratitude. "You have saved us. The chapel, the land, it feels alive again." I removed my helm and bowed my head. It was the lady's will that guided me. I only did what was necessary to restore her light. The villagers gathered around, their thanks heartfelt and earnest. Children ran to touch Beaufort, their laughter echoing through the square. It was a scene of joy, a stark contrast to the fear that had gripped this place only days before. As the crowd began to disperse, the old man pulled me aside. "What will you do now, Sir Knight?" he asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. "I must continue my quest," I replied, my tone resolute. "The lady has shown me that there are still shadows in this world that must be banished. My journey is far from over." The man nodded, his weathered face solemn. "You are always welcome here, Sir Julien. We will keep the chapel as it is now, a beacon of hope." The Frenchman smiled at him and raised a hand in return. I clasped his shoulder. "Thank you. Keep your faith strong, and the lady will watch over you." Turning to Elise, I gestured toward the horizon. "Will you join me? The road ahead is long, and I could use an ally who knows the ways of magic." He went toward Kayla. She hesitated, her gaze distant. For now, my path lies elsewhere. But perhaps our roads will cross again. I extended my hand, and she clasped it firmly. May the lady guide you, Elise. You, Julien, she said with a faint smile. Mounting Beaufort, I turned to face the open road. The weight of doubt that had once burdened me was gone, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. I was not yet a Grail knight, but I was a knight renewed, stronger, wiser, and more steadfast in my faith than ever before. As I rode out of the village, the sun climbed higher in the sky, its rays illuminating the path ahead. Greater trials awaited me, of that I was certain. But with the lady's light as my guide, and the lessons of this journey etched into my heart, I knew I was ready to face whatever lay ahead. For Bretonnia, for the lady, and for all who could not fight for themselves, I would not falter. The quest continued, and I would see it through to the end.